Well, hey folks, welcome to today's Booth Mini Gathering. We are in the midst of a week in which we're focusing on Indigenous perspectives and awareness. And of course, there are lots of ways we could do that, and there's a number of different things that'll be happening and have happened over the course of these days to help attenuate us more keenly to those things. And in this particular mini booth gathering, I am excited to have a very special guest for us all. I want to introduce you to James Thunder. James, who says he's Jimmy in everyday life. James is a guy with a lot on the go. He is the founder of Reconciliation Thunder, which is a nonprofit that uses social media to help us all understand the basics of decolonization. My goodness, there's a big thing to try to boil down. And to guide us toward truth and reconciliation in Canada and toward what it means for any given one of us or the things, organizations, the communities we're part of to begin to actually plug in and enact the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He is a board member of Circles for Reconciliation. Circles for Reconciliation does a number of things, but I think it's essential for you to know that that organization is a full and equal partnership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. At the center of what they do is the organization and trained facilitation of circles in which an equal number of Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks get together for several gatherings over a course of weeks and get to know one another and engage in respectful, mutual conversations all across Canada. And they've, like so many organizations, they've had to sort of reinvent themselves during the pandemic, but they are carrying on. If you want to know more about them, you can look them up online. You can find them at circlesforreconciliation.ca. Jimmy is also adjunct faculty at Horizon College and Seminary in Saskatoon, where he teaches Indigenous ministries. And right here at home in Winnipeg, he puts his Asper School of Business MBA to good use, consulting with a variety of First Nations organizations and helping them see their business initiatives through that lens. So I think that's already pretty interesting and pretty impressive. But for me, the kicker is that he also writes poetry. I found another one, another poet. It's good. I'm not a poet, but when I find poets, I get excited about it. And in the context of what we're on about today, that's especially relevant because Jimmy uses his poetry to teach. And in particular, he uses it to help us all get a good start on understanding what can move us toward decolonizing our own beliefs, our own actions, our own relationships, and to guide us toward true reconciliation. So here's the plan for the next little while. And this is going to take more than a couple of minutes. This is not a 10-minute long piece. So, fill up your coffee cup, pack your lunch, get ready to stay for a while. Jimmy has put this poem that I've just briefly mentioned into a video format. And in just a few moments, he's going to be along to share that with us. And it's about 11 minutes long. And if you're thinking like nice little kind of iambic pentameter rhyming Hallmark poetry, this is not that. This is a spoken word piece. It's like rap with the beat taken out. Was sort of the way he described it to me at one point. And then after that, I'll have a chance to talk with Jimmy and ask him some questions about the poem and about his own life and spiritual formation and journey and the ways that he sees his identity as an Indigenous person of Christian faith. That complicated intersection maybe, right? But we're going to hear about that from him. So the poem is called Dear Younger Me, an open letter to my younger self. All right, here we go.
Dear younger me, I'm writing to you at a time you had a paradigm that didn't belong. You thought we needed to move on without acknowledging our history. So let me briefly explain why you were wrong. You need to decolonize your life, your walk, your church. Decolonize the talk you use at work. Decolonize your mind, because decolonized eyes can see, a reconciled world, not as it is, but as it should be. And the first idea to leave behind, in order to decolonize your mind, is that we need to quit living in the past and cut it out with the guilt trip broadcasts. It's not about the guilt. Like 9/11 or Remembrance Day, it's about remembering the children who were taken away and were lost forever and were buried in unmarked graves. It's actually about mourning a national tragedy annually, and gradually, as mutual love and respect convey this truth, that love paves the way to discuss what's next to do. Another idea to leave behind in order to decolonize your mind is that reconciliation is not needed. The treaties were legal, both sides were equal, and natives were fairly treated. That's where I bring up Eddie Koikimambo, the handsome Indigenous man in this photo. He couldn't comprehend how the mainland Australians thought they owned his home island. This was because the ridiculous doctrine terra nullius, meaning no man's land, held that the British man saw the natives as flora and fauna because they weren't farming. Mabo fought for years at disarming this doctrine, and hardly after his dying, the Supreme Courts ruled, deciding to make terra nullius obsolete. Mabo's fight was complete. But it doesn't feel the same when you swap Australia with Canada's name. You'll be taught the fact that the Indian Act followed legal process, but miss the reality that legality is not the same as fairness. Another idea to leave behind in order to decolonize your mind is that it's not about the TRC, it's about hard work and equality. Native people just to see we all have opportunities. Let me explain, younger me, the role of the Indian Act and the numbered treaties. A nation is simply a collection of those who collectively chose to be one. At Canada's creation, it was a nation surrounded by nations stationed since the dawn of memory. But it wanted to be the only one and used the land from sea to sea to build their own economy. They tried telling the First Nations that they weren't nations using legalese. It's what colonialism means, absorbing a nation by erasing its identity. See, your grandfather was there when they brought us Treaty 9. At the time, it seemed fair. He agreed with what was promised and gave his consent, but their intent was dishonest. They were colonial tools used to restrict what we can do. For example, if we wanted to travel, we needed an Indian agent's permission to. I mean, you always hear it, but actually seeing a pass filled and signed by a man requesting to hunt on his traditional lands really impacted my spirit because I couldn't understand how a government could be so paternalistic to a grown man. So no, because of the restricting policies that destroyed our economies, I feel that we're not on a level playing field. Another idea to leave behind in order to decolonize your mind is that First Nations aren't nations. It's just a name. They're really the same as other Canadians. So the Indian Act, it's a legal apparatus that holds nation-to-nation relation in the form of Indian status. We learned this when they tried to abolish the Act in 1969. At the time, the Prime Minister tried to administer his white paper, but Harold Cardinal threw down his red paper that said, "We don't want to keep the Act because it's good. It isn't. It's discriminatory from start to finish. But we prefer living under the Act than pay the price of giving up our sacred rights." Another idea to leave behind in order to decolonize your mind is that we just need to let go, because all the major conflicts happened so long ago. Well, the first event that captured my attention and sparked all my questions was Oka's contention, when that town found the need to build a golf course on Mohawk burial grounds. Why, knowing the cries of those who buried ancestors, did investors feel it was okay to move into Kanesatake this way? And how could this happen now that the federal government confound us with a lack of respect for those buried in the ground? They say the major conflicts happened long ago, centuries or more. But no, Oka happened when you were 4. Another idea to leave behind in order to decolonize your mind is that reconciliation will never happen in our lifetime, because Indigenous demands will never be satisfied. So because of Oka, the government formed a royal commission. I guess the first rendition of a mission for reconciliation. Beyond meeting demands, they shared a 20-year plan for those on treaty lands to improve their relational health. But over those 20 years, that plan just sat on the shelf. Today's iteration of that vision is called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Murray Sinclair, who made us aware that if it took 7 generations to forge the state that we're in, we need to at least begin, because it may take 7 more to restore our relationship to what it was before. I know it's embarrassing to consider how wrong you've been for so long, but if you humbly accept what I'm writing, you won't be dying on the wrong side of history. So forget the wasted time and commit yourself. Use your life to bring reconciliation to light and prevent those calls to action from being left on the shelf. Decolonize your life, your walk, your church. Decolonize the talk you use at work. Decolonize your mind, because decolonized eyes can see a reconciled world, not as it is, but as it should be. Egoze, miigwech.
I am so delighted to be able to actually have James Thunder, Jimmy, right here with us. My regret in this, Jim, is that, as with so many things these days, we can't do this live, because it would have been awesome to have you on campus and in the space to meet the people and, all of that. And we don't get to do that, but we get to do this. So it's a lament and a thing that I'm grateful for, both,
Absolutely.
Now, I'm tempted, like really tempted, to dig into the content of the poem, which I thoroughly enjoyed several times. I keep going back to it. I'm actually shamelessly mining it personally. So it's become a real reference piece for me, which I'm grateful for too. But I'm not going to do that, because your Reconciliation Thunder project has a series of short vignettes or expositions, I believe is what you called them, where you actually break that whole piece down. And so I'm just gonna let those stand on their own. We're not going to recover that ground. We'll put links at the end of this video to those exposition pieces and the main poem, so folks can go check all that out for themselves. But I do have a couple of why questions about the poem. And I mean, I'm calling it a poem, which some folks might be kind of like, yeah, I don't really do poetry, but it's a spoken word piece. Like, is that a better way to describe it?
Either or, yeah, it is what it is. It is poem. It is poetry. But yeah, yeah, it is. You can call it a poem if you'd like, or a spoken word, either or.
Okay, as long as I'm not going to offend the artist here, but you don't strike me as this could sound judgy, as overly sensitive.
Yeah.
But I have some why questions about it, though. And the first, I'll just put them together, and you can just pick them up however you want. Okay. So the first question is, why a letter to your younger self? And then the second question is, why that form? Why make a letter to your younger self in that shape, the shape of a spoken word or poetry piece?
Right. So your first question, why a letter to my younger self? It was a really conscious choice to choose my audience. In this video, I wanted to speak to people who had not really begun their journey of, exploring our history, our colonial history, and maybe had some the different reasons why they would hesitate to do that. And that's where I was, as earlier on in my life, there were some some myths, there were some stereotypes, there were just different things that were present in my environment that I had internalized about myself, about my people, about what it means to be Canadian, what it means to be Christian, all of these things. And so I thought to myself, what a better way to reach these people than to just be vulnerable and say, look, if I had to learn this, then I invite you to learn this as well. Join me in my learning journey as an Indigenous person. And believe me, when I had first wrote this, I wrote about, it was about 20 pages of learning. First of all, I was invited to speak on this, and it was 20 pages, and I had to really narrow that down. And once it was getting close to being finished, with all the work that I had put into it, I realized that it's not going to be something I'm going to give just once, and then I had really thought about, do I really want to be the Indigenous person that's just going on record as someone who had all these things that I had to unlearn about myself? But at the end of the day, I decided that that's what I want to do, because I was, at the end of the day, that vulnerability is going to be the thing that is necessary for a lot of people to check themselves and to engage in this conversation. And so, yep, happy I did that. And I believe that from the time it was first spoken until it was put into video form, and now all the people that have seen it, I think it's really done what it was supposed to do in terms of bringing people into this engagement. So yeah, letter to my younger self, just because I can reach the audience better when I relate to them, when I can say, like, I understand where you're at because I was there too. Mm. So that's the first question of, so why to my younger self? And then your second question was, why a spoken word poem? And part of it is just because when I was first asked to speak, I was asked to do a vignette. It was something that was meant to be artistic. And it's necessity is the mother of invention here, because it was Wendy Park of Forever Families. She had hosted her Belong Summit, and it was my first year being part of it. And she said, yeah, so 5 minutes, maybe 10, and it can be about whatever it is that you want, whatever you want to reflect on. And so for me, I said, okay, something artistic. I like spoken word, poetry. Haven't done it a whole lot, but I love it. I love to rap as well, so like spoken word is like taking the beat out, but just like making all the words flow the way that you want, and so yeah, it was just like, it was a good reflection for me in terms of seeing how far I've come, and yeah, putting it together, I think it's a way to get some complex ideas into a small piece that that people can engage with, and enjoy engaging with, like some of these words, making them sound that they just flow together, like the Indian Act. It's a legal apparatus that holds nation to nation relation in the form of Indian status. It's like, it's something that, as I was memorizing it, it sort of rolls off your tongue, kind of a thing. But then you can go back and you can it can help people remember, like what this whole thing is, like it's the fact that what the treaties were meant to be, these nation to nation partnerships and agreements, are now sort of funneled down into this draconian piece of legislation that, the irony that's there is that it isn't nation to nation, and it never was. The whole Indian Act is meant to be an assimilation policy. And so, yeah, and so it was, yeah, a lot of fun, because you can really unpack it and use it, in a lot of different ways.
It sounds a little bit like you're describing, it was a passion project as well as an assignment, brought together something you really love and enjoy doing. And you've got this short period of time to talk about this like enormous thing. And how am I going to do that? But it also sounds like I've sort of long been of the conviction that art evokes well and teaches poorly. And that when we try to do something genuinely artistic, but we're actually trying to just say this thing, it tilts to propaganda like way too fast, which I think this piece is sort of saved from because it comes out of your passion for this, for the form itself, right? But it's
Mhm.
full of content. And so it feels a little bit like friends of mine that are songwriters would say that the discipline of songwriting forces them to sort of often to discard the extraneous or fluffy parts of the idea and just sort of augur into something essential, right? Something that is like the illustration you just used about trying to describe this relationship of the Indian Act to the parties that are party to this act and how it doesn't do what it even claims to do, but does something quite horribly different than that. Even trying to fit that into some rhyming couplets means you kind of have to muse on what's the essential thing here that I want to carry forward. What do I want to carry into this conversation in this way, and how might that open to something bigger?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's interesting to note that even if you're just speaking to an audience, that a lot of times, just like the way that we process information, people will remember how you made them feel, you know, and not necessarily what you said or every word that you had said. And even just like when you're looking at rhetoric, I think it was Aristotle that broke down the three different elements. It was like logos, ethos, and pathos. Reason, character, and emotion. And so a lot of times these different ways of convincing people and bringing people to a new understanding of those different elements. It's the emotion that's often the strongest. I heard an analogy that often we're like elephants, like we're riders on the elephant. Our logic and our reason is the rider on the elephant, and it's that motion of the elephant that's moving us around. So the flip side of that is like when you have something like a spoken word poem and you can sort of engage that emotion, you try to move the elephant in the right way, and then tackle the reason, as you're doing that. One of the things that I wanted to get through is, as I'm tackling the different these different myths, that I had to unpack. One of the things that was important to me was right near the front, talking about the fact that it's not about guilt. Like when we talk about trees, when we talk about the Indian Act, when we talk about residential school, it's not about guilt. It's about we're suffering. It's about remembering, that mother who was, waiting for the end of the school year for her child to come home, only to find out that the child had passed away, for months, and that grief that she feels and standing with her and being with her, and the community and that times 1,000, and remembering every year, and to make sure it doesn't happen again, So it's about being human, it's about being people together, and I think if you can move people's elephant away from feeling that you're calling them out and you're guilt tripping them and moving them to like, hey, let's talk about how to do life together, then I think that then you move that elephant into a place where the writer can listen, and so that's one of the things I had meant to do with this piece.
And if I'm not mistaken, I can't recall the author whose work works extensively with that elephant and the bird on the back image at the moment, but I have read their work, um, and it's an interesting idea because one of the things that particular person suggests as a next in that illustration is that we're the rider, and what we tend to do as humans is then explain where the elephant went. We make meaning out of where our feeling took us. And so if we can go there and then reflect on the way we felt, where our emotions took us. So instead of reason first followed by emotion, it's actually emotion first followed by reason. So I was just sort of enjoying the irony of you, Jimmy, as like a Western educated Indigenous person quoting a Greek philosopher as an entry point. And I think that's part of what uniquely equips you to do what you're doing. You know, that you kind of live at that complicated intersection, and you've had to kind of sort some of those things through. I remember when we chatted the other day in advance of this conversation, you were telling me a little bit about growing up in Sioux Narrows, I think, right?
To look out.
Sioux,
Yeah.
I had it half right.
That's right.
And what I remembered from that was the sort of the small town part, and you talking about feeling like there were two categories of people, two groups of people. There were ordinary people, I think was the phrase you used, and then there were Indigenous people.
Mm,
And Indigenous people weren't ordinary people, and that's when you talk in the poem about I had a paradigm that didn't belong.
yeah,
That's part of what you're unraveling, right?
that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's yeah, our worldview, right? How do we see the world? How we understand the world? You know, if you were to ask me as a child, young child, what kinds of people live in your town? It's like the native people, and then just the plain regular people, and so the power of that, is only was was only something I can unpack like later in life. Like what does it mean just to be a normal person or a regular person? And you see this sort of um, yeah, you unpack it now, and I can look at that through different lenses, like group theory and that type of a thing. But when you look at Christians today and you have these conversations, you can sort of see this in our theology, where some Christians would say that because of our Christian identity, our identity in Christ is the identity that matters, and so they quote the verse in Galatians where it says we are neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, and they would say we're all one in Christ, so let's just forget about talking about our nationalities and our differences and that kind of a thing. And so what that does is that serves to go back to the normal nationality, right? Because if you some well sort of meaning and well-intentioned people, they might say something like, when I look at you, I don't see color, like I don't see your nationality. You're just a normal person, right? So it goes back to that. Well, what's normal then? What is the standard nationality? What's the standard language? And so when you do that, your people don't realize that they're doing more harm than good, right? It's going back to that paradigm, the power dynamic of what a standard human is, and so yeah, these are things that we really need to think about, as Christians. When we're developing our worldview, we need to unpack all these different identities, like what is my Christian identity, and how does it relate to my political identity and my cultural identity and my national identity, and so on.
It's an interesting and complicated intersection, right? Because that normal human that you're talking about, when we think about that issue in light of, say, something like the doctrine of discovery, which exported a normal human, the quotes stay in place around normal, right? And that a normal human was a subject of a European Christian monarch, a Christian by national, political, and religious definition. And it was out of those roots that this hubris of we can stick a flag in any beach we come to and say this is now our land, that actually was the fuel in the engine of this so-called age of discovery.
Yeah.
So here you are in the 21st century on this chunk of the planet, sorting through all these different identities and talking to the world around you, among other things, about decolonizing our mind and our speech and our places of work and our churches, our religion, um, we might not have enough time for this answer, Jimmy, but I'd love it if you take a kick at talking about what it's like for you as an Indigenous person to have a decolonized Christian faith.
Yeah. It's actually in some ways very, very simple. To me, um, I think of a decolonized faith is just the faith that God had meant it to be in the very first place. Like it's what God had in mind when he sent his son to this earth, when he lived a life to teach us how to connect with God, and when he died for us on the cross. That's a decolonized faith. That in a nutshell, just that. Jesus didn't come to this earth to, he didn't have this idea, one day, there's going to be a nation that's going to merge their belief in me with their political aspirations, and they're going to spread across the world, and they're going to plant flags in other soils, and they're going to tell other nations that, because they're not farmers or using the ground, that they're just the same as animals, and they can be pushed aside, and and I'm going to make this nation and give them a power dynamic that they can fight as strong as they want to keep it in place, and that kind of thing. And he didn't have any of that in mind. Like, that's not why he came to this earth. That's not why he came to this planet. It's not why he lived his life. Not why he taught us what he did. Not why he died on the cross. Like, that's all of that is stuff that humans have added to this, layer upon layer of what God had intended and what Christ had intended. And so decolonizing our faith is in just really taking all of that out. It's very simply, you just take all that out, and you look at who's God and who Jesus is, and you remember that God to us is something that we're going to be continuously learning about and growing with. Like, it's as the scripture says, we're going to be continually working out our salvation. There's Gregory of Nyssa refers to God as a mystery, and if you look at all of a lot of indigenous words for the creator translate as mystery, like that he's, we have Kichimanatu, the great spirit, and you have the creator, but then you also have some translations as the mystery, and there's wisdom in that, because if you look at how God revealed himself to a lot of our indigenous nations, it's through general revelation, it's through his creation, it's through his world, like how he structured and ordered the world. So what did God tell us about himself by how he made the world that indigenous nations lived in so closely, symbiotically, and yeah, one of the words is just the great creator, the great mystery. And so when we look at that, and we spend time just really unpacking that mystery, that's it allows us a lot of flexibility than if we assume that we know God and we put him into a box and we understand him completely. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's essentially what it is. And when we bring culture into the mix, it's like what we're doing is no different than what a pastor does in this context every Sunday. You have a pastor who is reading something that was originally written in Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, and that was written at a specific time to a specific cultural audience, and he's unpacking that. If he's doing his hermeneutics well, he's taking all of that and homiletics and what have you, proper exegesis. If he's doing all that, then he's taking this message and he's bringing it back and repackaging it to this time, this generation, this day, this context, this language, and their instruments are playing, this generation's musical instruments, so none of this harps and lyres and that kind of a thing. So every single Sunday we see contextualization taking place, and we just don't give it a second thought because this is normal worship, normal Christianity, So when it comes to indigenous Christians, it's really all of that everyone's doing in this nation, in this culture. We just do the same thing. Just looks a bit different.
Right, and it's same thing but different. That's an interesting space to be in, because any belief that we hold there's sort of, we could break it down into sort of two ideas. There's the belief, the thing, uh, and then there's how we hold it.
Mm.
Because somebody could, and many do, take that simple belief that you described in, just now, and hold it in ways that are vertical and militant, that are weaponized as superiority. And so how would you describe, and that's not what I heard you describing. So that makes me intrigued to say, if you were going to try to put words around how you hold your Christian faith in contexts that are not Christian, how would you describe that?
Hmm. So yeah, so say that again. So there's how I hold my faith in contexts that are not Christian.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you elaborate on that question?
Well, what kind of words would you use? Maybe I'm asking a question about attitude
Hmm.
or posture.
Hmm.
So when you're the person in the room that's an Indigenous person of Christian faith, and that's not the identity spiritually, religiously of maybe anybody else in the room, how do you hold that identity?
Hmm.
How do you think about what it means to have that identity in that context?
To
Did that,
have a
did that help?
Yeah. So to have a Christian identity in a context or in a room or maybe there no one else is Christian kind of thing. Like
Well, and
and
arguably in a culture that's post-Christian, you know,
yeah,
that
yeah,
this
yeah,
is not a Christian nation in any sense that the explorers meant it when they jumped on their ship and said, "We're Christians. We're going to Christianize the world."
yeah, yeah. I think yeah, largely where we see ourselves in society is because of the misinterpretation over the past generations and centuries of what it means to be a Christian, you know. And so this whole post-Christian is not just uh, post what I was communicating in you know almost oversimplified kind of a thing of what Christianity should be. It was this whole mix of everything else, right? The doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, all these other things packaged in. And so when we say post-Christian, it's like, yeah, it's post all of that too, right? It's post of this idea of what Christianity should have been over this period. And so yeah, so for me then as an Indigenous person, it's yeah, it is uncomfortable in some cases because of it's almost like Christianity has such bad PR, like it's the case where um when people hear the word Christian and when people hear the word Jesus, it conveys in many cases attitudes and ideas that Jesus himself didn't want associated with his name. And so I'd imagine that I would assume he'd probably feel the same way, if he was to be in our culture and our society. I think he would feel a lot of the same feelings that we do. you know um and it's one of the reasons why in the poem, Dear Younger Me, I say to decolonize your faith and decolonize your church, knowing full well that a lot of times when I'm presenting and using this poem, it's not going to be necessarily in a faith context. It'll be outside of that, where that sort of identifies me in a way as a Christian. So I'm bringing that outside of that of the discussion, the church walls as well, which I think is good and I think should happen, because we need to undo this negative PR that the church has experienced over these past generations. And so I think that yeah, those conversations are difficult to have, but yeah, I think they're necessary, in this culture, in this generation, to get people to engage with yeah, just a new understanding of what Christianity is, could be, should be.
There's a somehow through all of that bad PR, and I mean it's really bad PR. That's a very gentle way to say that, James.
Yeah.
Um, when we got the Protestants and the Catholics competing to see who can build residential schools first in the name of God, that's bad PR. Uh,
Yeah.
to use a sort of local illustration. Um, in the face of all of that, in the midst of all of that, somehow something mysteriously good has managed to endure. And I think that's what the mystics were after. I think that's what they're touching when they feel like everything is connected, which is sort of this place where all the mystics end up. Um, one friend of mine says if our Christian idea about the nature of the divine sort of has any merit, if we believe that everything comes from God and returns to God, then we should be less surprised when spiritual truths overlap than we are when they don't.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And I think that yeah, in if we look at indigenous ways of knowing and indigenous ways of perceiving and understanding the world, uh, yeah, I think that that rings true as well. You know, um, yeah, because a lot of times we think that again, this whole normal, um, this normal humanity, it also puts normal ways of perceiving and understanding the world, right? And so when you see indigenous people that have different ways of solving problems and engaging with each other in relationships, then um, yeah, you find that sometimes even when you have good ideas and good solutions, these ideas are borrowed, and you can't trace the ideas back to the indigenous peoples who came up with it. And sometimes and these are big things and small things, but I mean the one example that comes off the top of my head is the expression "bury the hatchet." Like a lot of times, like you wouldn't give it a second thought, but that's actually from an indigenous. That's a First Nation ceremony, a sacred ceremony that comes from. When two nations would be fighting together, and they in whatever way they come to an agreement of peace, and so they'll take like the hatchet or the tomahawk or the war axe or whatever they called it in their language, and there'd be a ceremony where there'd be a hole would be dug. You piled the dirt over on top, in some case a boulder on top, and that sacred ceremony is extremely powerful because that puts an end to that conflict, right? And so this here, that there is, it's a powerful sort of symbol that really has power and influence over how that society operates. And in Canada, as an example, we have strong symbols as well. When we look at how our government operates, we have God as a symbol. Like it's used in our political system a lot, because if people, if we don't have these symbols of things that people already give like authority to, then these whatever institutions that we come up with to govern ourselves, they don't have that merit or strength to be adopted by the people. And so in indigenous sort of circles, it's ceremony. It's ceremony. It's engaging with the spirit. It's engaging with the minnow b'madaziwan, the good life. So these are strong symbols on our side that really make they give our societies a structure. And there's one of an indigenous scholar I read referred to that as Anishinaabe Constitutionalism. You take these structures that really guide our societies, and you look at that, to use like a sort of a Western word, you call it Anishinaabe Constitutionalism because you recognize that there's a limit to how our society operates. And it also tells you that we actually had fully functioning societies. And the Iroquois Confederacy is another example of that. And so when you had newcomers come and build their political institutions, they looked at how our societies were structured, and they borrowed some of these ideas, symbol structures and what have you, built a government on it, but then they never cite the source. And so again, I mean, it's sort of related to what you're saying about these truths coming back, you know. But it's in many ways, you know, if something works, if something is true, then a lot of people can come to the same realities, you know. And so um, the challenge is when you define, you know, whose truth it is and who came up with it, who sourced these ideas, you know. And that's a way of generating a power imbalance as well.
Well, I think lots of times the idiom that carries the symbol, bury the hatchet, for example,
Yeah.
we retain the idiom, but because we never set out to acknowledge the source. Now I'm using we language about European settlers, you know,
Yeah.
my heritage, because we never set out to cite the source. We set out to exploit the source, and so we retained the idiom, but we lost the heart of the symbol
Hmm.
because we weren't trying to retain the heart of the symbol,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And the same thing kind of works in reverse, right? Like I think about things that are in our common idioms in our language around color, like blackmailing somebody, for
Hmm.
instance.
Hmm.
That's about as racist a perspective on what it means to do something to another human being. Why black? Well, there's a reason why black, and it's not a good one, you know.
Yeah.
And so we keep the idiom, but we just the fact that this little bit of language might actually carry something that we have profoundly in common with our fellow humans, with our kindred.
Hmm.
That's what gets lost, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And and mining that stuff, talking about it, having conversations like the circle conversations that you're also part of facilitating across the country, um, through part of your work. Those kinds of things give us a chance to actually surface that stuff again, to center it in the conversation, and to have those aha moments where we get to go, oh, I've never thought of it that way before. And that moment of I've never thought of it that way before is really the crack where the light of decolonization gets in.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's and that's so powerful, you know, because really what it is, it's all about just taking the things that we think are normal and just saying like, actually, it's not as normal as you think, you know, and it's and just doing that again and again and again and again, and you don't really stop, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I so my wife is Jamaican, and one thing that I love about her is and just our marriage together is that we've come to the realization fairly early in our marriage that I will never understand what it is to be black, and she'll never understand what it is to be indigenous, and the both of us are okay with that, and but it doesn't mean that you don't need to learn. In fact, you never stop learning, and it's a lifelong learning, and it's a lifelong journey, and it includes these things: language, the little words that we say, these little things that we don't give a thought to, but what are they, what do they mean, where do they come from? From her I learned what microaggressions are, you know, what that term means, you know, the fact that you know, her in her experience, you know, as is the case for many indigenous people, there are things that people would say that to them are just nothing. It's just normal language, right? But they cause offense, you know, and they hurt. And so there's a phrase that explains it very well, you know, death by a thousand knives, you know, because if you call out every single microaggression, you will just get completely burnt out. But then if you don't call out any, then it allows the microaggressions to perpetuate. And so how do you win? You know, you win by having everyone come together and just have a commitment to continuous learning, you know, and taking that initiative themselves to be open and to be part of these circles for reconciliation, be part of these conversations, and just constantly learn about other cultures and other people's experiences that are different than your own. And the more that we do that, the more we can reduce microaggressions and harm caused by our language and our words.
Well, and you know, James, not to be vague as much as encompassing, that's how we learn to love one another, right?
Yeah,
And so then we actually care about getting behind the thing that hurts.
yeah,
You're right. We can't live there. I can't. I can't. I don't even. well, I have moments where I wish to undo my whiteness. It's not, it's no fun living with the PR. I feel the same way about the word Christian sometimes,
Yeah.
uh, of course. But the solution, as you pointed out earlier, is actually not to undo those things. It's to recontextualize them
Mm. Mhm.
and to put them into a generous context that includes more ideas and experiences and understandings of them than the ones that I carried into the context.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I really love what you said about, love, sort of being, that glue that holds us together kind of thing, and that motivating factor. Like there's a book that I read way back called The Calvary Road by Roy Heason, and one of the images that he uses is the image of a bicycle wheel. In it, he says that as the spokes get closer to the hub, they also get closer to each other. And in the same way that we as Christians, as we get closer to Jesus, we also draw closer to each other. And so that's it's powerful, but also puts out a challenge because if we're not doing that, if we're not drawing closer to each other and drawing closer to Jesus at the same time, then the question is like, well, why aren't we? Like, what's the problem there? If we're and so it really, when it comes to identities between races and the intersection between our Christian faith and racial identities, we need to do our conversations well. And one thing that's important to do well is conflict. We need to do conflict well and have our discussions well. Conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. Conflict can be a good thing. It can be a constructive thing. It could be a healthy thing, especially like in the context of a marriage. You have conflicts all the time, but if you do it well, you pull each other together rather than tearing yourselves apart. And so if you do it well, then you pull each other together rather than pulling each other apart. And so in the context of our Christian faith, we need to be doing exactly the same thing. We need to be learning about each other, and we need to be doing conflict well. We need to commit to following Jesus no matter what the cost, and we need to be willing to have positive and healthy conversations. M. Scott Peck said it really well when he said that mental health is commitment to the process of it's a process of continuous commitment to reality regardless of the cost. And so that's what we got to do. That's a paraphrase from a verse in Corinthians. I would almost say, when he's talking about bringing every thought captive to Christ. Just yeah, we need to be yeah, willing to follow the truth, wherever the argument leads, and to be constructive, and to be open to learning other perspectives, other ways of knowing and understanding the world that we live in.
We can keep going, Jimmy, but I think that's a great place to hit the not recording button, and and just say how much I've appreciated and enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts, for your wisdom, your insight, for your grace in the conversation. Um, all delightful things to me, and I know they will be to the community that's going to engage with this as well. To those of you who've been watching, if you want to follow up, again, we'll post connections links just in print on the screen at the end of this video, so you can find James online. You can find the Reconciliation Thunder Project, and you can find out how to chase him down and have him come talk wherever you are when we get to do that together again. So, all things to look forward to. Grace and peace to you all. It's been good to be with you. We'll chat again soon. Bye for now.